You are listening to the HB Outdoors Waterfowl Podcast, Episode 7. In this episode of the HB Outdoors Waterfowl Podcast, we compare 3 and a 3.5 inch waterfowl loads, and we're also joined by Casey Hopfer of Avery Outdoors and Field Proven Calls to talk about early season duck decoy strategies. All right, welcome to the show. I am your host, Josh Palm, and I'd like to welcome you to Episode 7 of the HB Outdoors Waterfowl Podcast. Joining me, as always, is my co-host, Dan Harushka. Dan, hello, sir.
How you doing?
I'm doing outstanding. Excited to get into this episode of the podcast. We've got a really cool set of topics that we're going to cover this week. Some things that a lot of people debate as far as, a 3-inch load versus a 3.5-inch load. And then, we have a great chat with Casey Hopfer, who's a pro staffer for Avery Outdoors and Field Proven Calls. And we talk about, some early season duck decoy strategies, what you can do as far as type of birds you're using and the decoy setups that you run and all that kind of stuff. So a lot of really good information that we're going to cover in this episode.
Yeah, and duck comes in here Saturday, so, you spend a lot of time thinking about what you're going to do first day and, a lot of scouting and, we're going to be asking him a lot of questions about every situation you can get into in the early season. So I'm looking forward to chatting with him and talking a little bit about, 3-inch and 3.5 here in a second.
Yeah. And, let's just go ahead and just jump right into it. The 3-inch versus the 3.5-inch debate is one that, it's had across internet message forums all over the place. Everyone's got their stance on that. You've got some folks that are the bigger is better mentality. Some have the 3 inches plenty mentality. Where do you weigh in on that just generally?
I go with the 3-inch. I guess I never had a gun that shot 3.5. I've shot 3.5 at a, friend's guns. And, when you're having a bang out hunt and shooting all day long, it's a place I didn't want to go with my shoulder. So, we know that they do some research on the recoil here, but, you shoot a couple 3.5s and, I don't know if it was just the turkey loads in it, but it was just something that I didn't feel like spending all day out in the field having to deal with.
Yeah, I'm sort of in the same boat. I mean, I have to be honest, I've never owned a 3.5 inch chambered gun. So I can't say that I've used it a ton, but just for logistics and logical purposes, I side on the 3-inch as well. And we've got a little bit of research that we were able to track down to sort of help kind of frame this discussion. And I'll kind of narrate that right now. This is a test that was conducted, it was published in Field and Stream. And essentially it was 12 gauge, 3-inch, 1 1/4 ounce black cloud double Bs at 1450 feet per second, shot with a modified choke. And it was compared to a 3.5 inch, 1.5 ounce load of black cloud double B shot at 1500 feet per second, also with a modified choke. So the loads are about as comparable as you could possibly get. And basically the test indicated that at 40 yards in a 30-inch circle, the 3.5 inch load put 72.6% of its shot in the circle, which was totaling 77 pellets, versus a 3-inch that put 71.8% of its shot in the circle, which constituted 63 pellet hits. So, for me, the loads obviously pattern very similar, and you're really not losing that many more pellets from 3 to 3.5 inch. Obviously, there is some, but 63 pellets is still more than adequate as far as to be lethal on waterfowl at 40 yards. What do you think?
Yeah, you're talking less than 1% of the shot, and I mean that's 14 pellets difference. So when you're talking that, and this kind of takes me back to the last conversation of why we shoot two, or why I shoot twos. If I go to the local store I don't live in a big town. So if I go to a local store, the 3.5 might be something that I just can't find. It might not be in stock. So, that kind of sways me towards a 3-inch as well.
Yeah, and there's a little more information to go along with this study here. They measured the length of the shot string, which averaged about 42 inches for the 3-inch shell and 49 inches for the 3.5-inch shell, and that was measured midway between the muzzle and the target that they were shooting at. So you're not seeing a significant difference in your shot string. And one thing that actually surprised me more than anything, I think, of this research is that both loads equally penetrated the ballistic gelatin at 30 yards to about 5 inches. So even though the 3.5-inch shell is 50 feet per second faster at the bore, and is an ounce and a half versus an ounce and a quarter, so it's carrying more weight and it's traveling faster. The downrange kinetic energy didn't translate to any additional penetration or knockdown power. So I thought that was really interesting. As far as a lot of people say they want that knockdown power of a 3.5-inch load, where based on this research, that doesn't necessarily exist.
Right, and this research came from Federal Cartridge Company. So Federal, they have these high-speed cameras, $80,000 high-speed cameras on this, and they, just spending days on this research. So when you have someone, I'm shooting 3.5s because, I'm going to knock them down and you can't even touch them there. Well, that's not the case. And I mean, it's, when I read that the first time, I was pretty surprised as well. They both penetrated the exact same mount, and it was pretty surprising to me. So that's something that we can talk about with amongst our friends out in the blind if they're trying to, big time you with a 3.5.
Yeah, and it's weird because it's counterintuitive to think that would be true, and if this wasn't done by a reputable facility, I would question the test results. But without having any further proof to think that these are not accurate, it's surprising how similar they patterned and penetrated in that regard. The other thing that I thought was very interesting, and this probably gets more to anything, this is one of two major factors why I continue to shy away from 3.5-inch shells and guns that are chambered in that length, is the 3.5-inch firearm basically produced a 50% increase in felt recoil than the 3-inch shell did. So, yes, a 3.5-inch load will offer you better performance to some degree. There's no question. But at what cost? I mean, you're taking a 50% more increased thump on your shoulder when you're doing that. So for me, the biggest concern is, yeah, ballistically, it may edge out the 3-inch and I may have more pellets downrange and that kind of thing, but can I recover quickly enough to get back on target and make another good shot as effectively with the 3.5-inch as I can with the 3-inch? So, there's a lot that goes into that as far as your personal abilities and that kind of thing. But for me, when I'm thinking about it, I shoot a gas operated gun for a reason. I don't want to be out there getting my shoulder thumped all day long when I'm in the blind. It's just, I like it as light possible recoil. That's just the way I am. But I guess, not everybody's like that. And, we've seen enough guys shooting 3.5-inch out of a pump gun that take the beating. So, there's certainly a lot of them out there,
Yeah. And like you said, I had shoulder surgery, in college and that's something I don't want to deal with. So, we, the one Eastern Shore hunt, our buddy was, using 3.5s, and after the second day, it kind of looked like his shoulder got run over by a truck. And I was like, what happened to you? And that was, it's a thumping. So for guys that want to go out every day and, shoot a bunch of birds, be ready to take a beating a little bit.
Yeah. And I don't want this to sound as, judgmental or, like one's better than the other, because obviously, if you get down to brass tacks and, all the measurables, although they're close, the 3.5-inch will outperform the 3-inch. There's no question.
Right.
But at what price and at what, trade-offs are you willing to do? For me, the things that I've seen in this research would not justify the jump up. The number one thing for me, though, why I tend to stay 3-inch and not entertain a 3.5-inch is simply the cost of the shells. I've got some price data here that I pulled off of Rogers Sporting Goods online. It's a place that everybody can order from. So I tried not to do geographic, pricing. This is something that everyone can go out on the internet and buy. So for an example, for your Kent Fast Steel 3-inch case or case of shells, $149.99. 3.5-inch, $204.99. Heavy metal 3-inch. These are number 2s. 3-inch, $239.99. 3.5-inch, $279.99. Federal Speed Shock, $119.99 for the 3-inch, $159.99 for the 3.5-inch. So you can see you're running $40 to $50 more per case of ammo just to shoot that 3.5. So for me personally, I don't know if the ballistical advantage of that, based on that cost and that recoil, is enough for me to want to make that change, at least not right now, especially when you can get the same technology that, the heavy metal and the things like that offer and the non-toxic loads that are just getting better and better. It just makes the 3-inch more attractive to me personally.
Yeah, I'm in the same boat, without a doubt.
So, yeah, and I mean, again, we can debate this all day long with a lot of people, but, it's something that I see a lot. I see a lot of it on forums and things, and I thought it would just be beneficial to bring some data to the discussion and, offer that as some rationale as to why we make the choices that we do. But, if you're out there and you think that, for whatever reason, the 3.5 offers benefits that we haven't touched on or that you think are noteworthy, feel free, let us know, shoot us an email, call us on the hotline, 724-609-FOWL, 724-609-3695. And, share your thoughts with us. And, like we've always said, if it's a great point that we didn't think about, we'll play it right here on the show and, we'll continue the conversation and let everybody weigh in and, see how that goes. So, but again, for me, I'm a 3-inch, chambered guy and, probably will stay that way for the foreseeable future. So we're joined by a really cool guy that we had a chance to meet through through Mark Brendemill, who we had on the show earlier in the year. Casey Hopfer lives up there in Richmond, Minnesota. He pro staffs for Avery Outdoors and for Field Proven Calls, and is just a really good dude and really knowledgeable guy. We had a really great conversation with him talking about early season duck decoy strategies. And I think maybe before we get into the interview, Dan, what do you talk a little bit about why this is an important topic for us to cover, as duck seasons are opening up around the country, this time of year?
Well, I mean, and some of our listeners, like we said before, we're getting a lot of feedback of guys just starting out and they want to know how to set things up. And, there's some things that, we even have questions about. And, you look on Casey's Facebook page and, he knows what he's doing. And, he's connected well in the waterfowl community and, he gets to pick brains all day about different setups and different ways to hunt birds. So, there's a lot of questions and I'm excited to talk to him just because I know he has a lot of the answers.
Yeah, no question there. And, I think one of the biggest things to take away from this is, there's a lot of common things that, regardless of where you hunt across the country, there's a lot of common practices that you can employ to be successful. You don't have to reinvent the wheel just because you hunt in Minnesota versus hunting in Virginia or Pennsylvania or Oklahoma. Yeah, there's going to be slight nuances here or there, but overall, the general principles and that kind of thing are similar. But we all know that there's no one easy answer that fits everything. So I'm really excited to get into some of those topics with Casey and hear what he has to say about some of those and some of the stuff that we have. So what do you think? You want to go ahead and get into the interview with Casey?
I do, and this is the main reason they call it hunting. You don't go out and you don't kill every time, and there's always some kind of obstacle that you have to overcome. So, like you said, there's not one silver bullet to get the job done every time, and we have a lot of good questions for him. So yeah, let's get at it.
All right, so let's go ahead. We're going to be joined by Casey Hopfer of Avery Outdoors and Field Proven Calls. All right, joining us on the show now is Casey Hopfer. Casey is a Avery Outdoors pro staffer as well as a pro staffer for Field Proven Calls. Casey, how are you?
I'm doing great. How are you guys doing tonight?
We're doing really well. We got a really interesting topic that we're going to cover tonight, and we're glad you're here to discuss it with us. The focus of this segment here is going to be early season duck strategies. And, we're, duck season's kicking in, around the country here in Virginia. We're starting up this week, and I know PA is going to be as well, where Dan and I are located. So we thought it would be a great time to kind of have someone come on and talk to us about different decoying strategies and things that you can do specifically in the early season when you're targeting, for the most part, resident birds. The migration hasn't really kicked in too much yet in a lot of places. So, it can be tough hunting on birds that get educated quickly and stuff like that. So, I'm really excited to talk with you about this and, get your perspective on that particular topic. So let's go ahead and get into it. And before we get too far into it, how about you take a second and just kind of describe for us, your typical hunting scenarios, the types of areas that you're hunting as far as, swamps, open water, fields, that kind of thing. Give us the lay of the land there as far as what you're typically seeing this time of year.
Sure. My season starts here. We start late September, so kind of the last weekend in September, our season opened this year. And where I'm at in central Minnesota here, Minnesota's north of the land of 10,000 lakes, so we've got a lot of lakes around, a lot of open water. A lot of farmland around us here as well. But my season usually starts on the open water front. The first probably 2 to 3 weeks, I'm hunting a permanent blind on a lake that my family owns some land on. So we hunt out of that for the first couple weeks of the season. And as the fields start getting harvested around the area here, we kind of will transform into some field hunting and some other open water hunting, just following kind of where the birds are at. If I'm able to hunt the field over water, 9 times out of 10, I'll do that and get where the birds want to be for feeding wise and save the roosts. Obviously, we never want to be shooting those up. But we do a fair amount of open water hunting early season. And I know today's discussion is kind of about the early season thing. So for that, most of my hunting is, like I said, permanent blind hunting on open water.
Yeah, Minnesota, I definitely want to get up there and hunt some of those lakes. I mean, it just seems like you guys have tons of birds up there, and, it's probably hard to choose a favorite, but what would you say is your favorite duck to target in the early season? You have the whole summer leading up to it, and a lot of excitement builds. What are you aiming for, on that first hunt?
My favorite bird to hunt in the early season, being that I live right on a river here right outside of town, it would probably be the wood ducks. The river that I'm on here just has a completely huge population of wood ducks, and I'm able to watch them all summer long and stuff. And coming into the fall, as season started, there's so many different ways you can hunt the wood duck, whether it be, in the backwaters, in the river, or in some flooded timber, or open water. We've shot wood ducks, and also we've shot them in harvested cornfields as well. And they're such a diverse bird on how you can hunt them. And they just never cease to amaze me with the colors that they have. They're such a beautiful bird and stuff. And that's probably going to be, I have to say, it's my favorite duck to hunt in the early season.
Yeah, I'm right there with you, Casey. Growing up in Pennsylvania and now being down in Virginia, early season, is wood duck prime time for us here. So, they're a blast to hunt. It can be fast and furious action for sure. Some of the best table fare you'll find. So, I'm right with you there when you're talking, wood ducks. But let me ask you. So, let me take a step back here and ask you this question as if I'm a first time waterfowler or a really, early novice, just getting started kind of thing. If you had one sort of tip that you think is paramount among other things, or just a really good general rule of thumb when it comes to hunting the early season, what would you say that one tip would be?
I would say the biggest thing, and I keep this kind of all season long, but do your homework before the hunt, before you start your hunt. Do the research, know where the birds are, know where the birds want to be, kind of what they're doing. But also just, on the early season spreads, just keep it simple. There's no reason to run food spreads or decoys and everything else. It's just keep it simple. Simulate what the birds are doing. If they're feeding in water holes here, go there and hunt the water holes where they're feeding and run, like cedar spread per se. And don't get too carried away and too caught up in having to run huge numbers and that. Just really keep it simple and keep it fun.
Yeah, those are great tips. Let me ask you, just from not being in that area, do you guys have a lot of cut corn already?
Yeah, right now, I've been out scouting all week, lining up for the weekend, and the majority of the dairy farms around the area here have chopped a lot of their corn. They're, as the corn's drying out here, and farmers are already starting to combine the corn as well. So, majority of the corn for the dairy farms is already down. So there's areas that have, whole sections of corn that are harvested. And with that being said, they're already starting to plow those fields under and stuff. So it gets really difficult because the farmers around here usually don't leave fields for long after they've been harvested. They go through and they till, a few days later. So it can make it difficult. But there is a lot of cut corn around already, yes.
Yeah, that would make it tough if they're, prepping for the next plant. I would say up here, we probably have, I don't know, maybe 5% of the corn cut. Like, there's just a ton of standing corn already. But all right, let's get into, a general setup. Let's talk about, landing holes and how far do you spread your decoys out? Do you have them bunched up like a bunch of coots out there, or is it you have a good distance between them? And let's talk a little bit about from your permanent blind, how close is your closest decoy and how far away is your furthest?
Sure. Where I'm at my permanent blind, that's, like I said, where I do the majority of my early season hunting. The first decoys are out. I've got quite a bit of cattails in front of the blind, so my first decoys from the blind are probably 10 to 15 yards from the blind. I'd say probably 10 yards. And I put them right along the cattails there in the still water. And what I do a lot of times there is I'll simulate my puddle ducks that I've got, and I'll take, the feeder packs of the Rainier decoys with the stretch neck feeders and the headless feeders and the butt-ups. And I simulate a flock of, feeding puddle ducks right along the cattails there. And then from there, depending on where the wind is at, the nice thing about my permanent blind is there's really only one wind that I can hunt it, and that's a straight east wind. So I'm on the west side of the lake on a little bit of a cattail point that comes out. So I can hunt it on most winds. Like I said, depending on where the wind is at, that'll dictate how I run my spread. But, landing holes are typically no greater than 10 to 15 yards across. And I mean, that's going to be totally maximum. Early season, we see a lot of small flocks of ducks on the lake. Therefore, I make small holes, keep the birds right where I want them. Don't let them get too crazy with where they're going to work. Kind of put the birds right where you want them. I don't spread the decoys out hugely far. I run a pretty tight spread. Like I said, I just keep it simple, nothing too crazy, not a lot of decoys. My average spread will be somewhere in, say, the 2 to 3 dozen duck decoys and half a dozen to a dozen geese that I run as well. And just kind of making a nice pocket for the birds to work so that, the landing hole is probably 15 to, say, 20 yards from my blind on most days.
I want to back up to just one thing that you said, because I think it's pretty important. A lot of times people think that, duck hunting's harder than it has to be sometimes. And you see, you turn on a TV show and you see mojo decoys going, and you see just, dozens and dozens of floaters out there, and, up game up on the bank, and, you see all this stuff going on. So when you're talking 2 to 3 dozen decoys and, 6-12 geese at the most, that's a lot less than what, you're seeing on these TV shows. But I think it's important to reiterate that, it's important to mirror what you're seeing. And, you don't necessarily have to be that overwhelmingly large, flock this time of year, to be successful. So, I think that that's something that, somebody that may not have a ton of experience hunting waterfowl flips on the outdoor channel and just sees massive decoy spreads, and they think that's what they need to do, in September and October. And, obviously that's, that's not the case. I mean, I've seen your Facebook page. There's plenty of kill photos on there right now that, would prove what you're saying to be absolutely true.
Like I said, just keep it simple. You don't need to have everything in the world to kill ducks, especially early season. If you do the homework, see what the birds are doing, and you're where the birds want to be. Just a few decoys to guide where you want the birds is really all that it takes.
Sometimes I feel like a broken record on this show, because we talk so much about scouting and putting in the time, and so I'm glad to hear somebody else say that, not just Dan and I. And I'm not going crazy, because it's just such a key important element of just being successful. But let me ask you this. So, let's say you're hunting an area that's got a lot of pressure. There's other people out there the same days that you're hunting, and they're approaching, they're doing the same kind of thing. They're seeing the birds that are out there. they're mirroring those birds. They're throwing out 2 to 3 dozen decoys, that sort of thing. Is there anything that you try to do specifically to stand out from the other guy, or is it more important to just, mirror what you're seeing and be as natural as possible? Or is there something else that you can do to help you stand out that gives you a little bit of advantage?
The biggest thing I would say there, if you want to stand out, the first thing would be is to be where the birds want to be, and if you can't be there and you have to start trying to pull birds, that's where you might increase your spread size or try and do something flashy, adding all kinds of motion or whatever you may do there, get louder on the call. But if you're able to be right where the birds want to be, if that means getting up 2 hours earlier to get to that spot, so be it. I've had times where I've left the house here at 2 o'clock in the morning for opening morning just to make sure that I'm at the right spot where the birds want to be, because I don't want to watch somebody else have all the fun when I can get there a little bit earlier and have that spot. It's only sleep,
Yeah, there's always time to nap, go home and relax on the couch. And I think I mentioned on last show, but I've been reading some articles about really good duck callers, and you're a pro staff for field proven calls, so I know you can work a call. But some of these guys are talking about how if they had a call or motion in their setup, they would take motion every time. So and those are some of the world champion duck callers. So just talk a little bit, how important is motion in a decoy spread?
I think in any decoy spread, whether you're hunting field or if you're hunting water, motion is critical. Really, just to have that realism in the spread. It's not looking like a bunch of bodies sitting there not moving at all. Whether it be adding a jerk string to it, or adding mojos, or just being where there's a little bit of wind if you can, to get the spread to work. No wind can be the killer of a hunt, because the birds won't work your spread right or whatever it might be, and there's no motion. So I would say that motion is the most critical thing when it comes to decoying birds.
Yeah, I agree with you completely. And the frustrating part about this is when you read articles about motion, and as a novice or someone that's getting into the sport, and you're trying to gather information about this, everybody says motion's so important, but rarely do they actually elaborate on that as to how to implement that motion into the spread. So take that a step further for me. And what I mean by that is, where are you going to put this motion in your spread? Is it something that you put in the hole, simulating, birds dropping down directly in that hole? Is it something that you show on the outer edge of the spread? As birds working the spread, do you put them near your blind? I mean, what's the thought process and the methodology behind, implementing the motion?
Sure. What I see a lot of times, especially early season, say like when I'm hunting wood ducks, is that I see the ducks attract to the motion, similar to like a mosquito goes to a light, or any bug goes to a light. I've had wood ducks bouncing off of mojo wings in a cornfield before, and they flood right to that. So with that being said, I like to keep the motion where I want the birds. So in the hole is the most critical part for me. If I'm running the jerk rig, I run that jerk rig and the decoys that are right in the hole, simulating a flock of birds that just landed. They're splashing around, they're sitting in there. The only time I'll run it in a different spot typically is if I'm hunting like a field spread early on and I want to get into some geese. I'll run some mojos right near the blind. That way, if a flock of geese is coming, I shut off the mojos, take them down off the pole, set, and that way they won't flare the geese off. But 9 times out of 10, I try and keep that motion in the hole right where those birds want to land.
Yeah, and go ahead and talk a little bit more about what you use for motion. We use, a lot of jerk rigs. Here in Pennsylvania, we're not allowed to use battery-operated decoys. So, the motorized mojos are out of the question for us. So, we do a lot of jerk rigs. And, if you do have a mojo or a jerk rig, what's your favorite there?
Sure. I run, traditionally, in Minnesota, we can't use battery-operated mojos for the first, 2 weeks of the season or so. So everything this season I've been doing has been manual. Any motion that I move in, you can run wind-operated motors if you like, but jerk rigs, stuff like that is the biggest thing. I've been fortunate enough to be able to hunt windy days here, where I haven't had to add too much motion in other than the wind moving the decoys around. But I really like to add, a jerk rig, put, say, 3 to 5 decoys on that jerk rig, drop it right in the hole, and as I'm sitting in my blind, I'm sitting there working it as the ducks are coming. If they start to work off, give the jerk rig a little motion, get the ducks' attention, bring them over. Once the regulations change here and we can use battery-operated mojos, especially in field hunting, I really like to add those into the spread. In the water let me rephrase that. In the water, I like to keep it pretty simple without the mojos, especially because where I'm hunting, a lot of times I'm trying to pull down geese too. So a lot of times when the geese are coming, they catch that flash of the mojo wings, it'll spook them off a lot. So most of my motion in the water hunting is done with a jerk rig.
Nice. And I was just gonna say, I read a lot about where people just refuse to use mojos and they say that they flare birds. Have you had any, experience with that?
Mostly just with geese, that I've had them flaring them off. And I've had times, I guess, where you put a mojo out and it works wonders, whether I'm hunting water or field. And there's been some times where it just doesn't work either. And the biggest thing there, if you're out hunting and you've got a few mojos out and a flock of ducks just won't come in, the simplest thing to do is just eliminate those mojos or any motion at once and see if that takes care of it. That's the simplest fix to it. If it doesn't affect it, start adjusting your spread and your conditions from there. But it's a simple fix. If your mojos are flaring birds, kill the mojos and try it without it for a few flocks. And a lot of times that might be able to make a difference.
Do you notice any difference on, overcast days versus sunny days?
I really haven't seen any difference as far as working mojos on sunny days or overcast days. I've ran them on both, and I've had pretty good luck with when I run them mojos. I don't run a dozen mojos every day. If I'm running a spread with a mojo in it, I'll have, like a water spread, usually only one, maybe two tops mojos. If I'm running the field spread, that's when I'll increase it, and I run as many as 5 or 6 at a time. In our late season spread. The early season, we usually keep it pretty simple.
I'm glad Dan asked you that because that was the follow-up question that I was going to ask. So, I've always wondered about, glare and flaring and all that kind of stuff. So, I'm glad to hear you address that there. But let me ask you something else. You see guys hunting, Canada geese and honkers and stuff, and they're, waving flags, and everybody knows how effective that can be when you're hunting geese, but you don't really hear many people talking about flagging ducks. And, I mean, for diver spreads and that kind of thing, I know guys will use flags in that regard, but, we're talking, kind of earlier season, more puddle duck type stuff. Can those ducks be flagged, or has anyone tried that, or have you ever tried that or heard of anyone going that route to try that, long range, grabbing attention, that sort of thing?
That's something that nobody's really ever tried around here. I've never tried it. I'm out hunting a field spread with, the duck and goose mix. Obviously, we have the goose flags with us, and it's something we use to grab attention on geese, the black flapping and stuff. But I've never had luck with it on ducks as I'm out, if I'm out goose hunting and a flock of ducks is out and I try it for the heck of it. I've really just never had luck with it.
Yeah. And I mean, that's something that I think I'm going to try out just to, see if it helps out. And I think you mentioned before, starting out, you use 2 to 3 dozen decoys. What kind of determines the change in that? When do you bump it up? You said, if you're hunting traffic a little bit, but let's talk, season wise, what is going to make you increase or decrease it? And, just for some of the starters out there, some of the beginner hunters, how many do they need to take out?
Sure. When I'm hunting the resident birds, usually it's the first week to maybe 2 weeks of the season, depending on the weather. That's when I'm running my small spreads and stuff like that. We get that first cold front push of cold air coming from the northwest, pushing those birds out, pushing new birds in. Those birds haven't been there. They don't know the same feeding spots where the other ducks were in different parts of the lake. That's when I start increasing my spread numbers. And by increasing my spread, I increase my pulling capabilities. More ducks, more visibility, and a lot of times you're more apt to get ducks to work those decoys. I'm not hunting ducks that have been feeding in the same spot for 2 months. I'm hunting ducks that just got here the day or two before, and they're looking for food. That's when my decoys increase. So as I start to see migrating birds coming through, that's when my spread starts to increase. And it'll change from there. The first 2 weeks, or the first week of the season here, I was running quite a few teal decoys and wood duck decoys. Going into last weekend, I hunted Saturday and I ran all mallard decoys with some widgeon and gadwall mixed in, a couple pintail decoys just to add some color and some variation. And then the next day, Sunday, I put my whole puddle duck spread away and I pulled out all my diver decoys. And I ran, I didn't pull out all the diver decoys, but I ran 24 diver decoys in lines on Sunday, when on Saturday I was hunting puddle ducks, just because what I was seeing on the lake. And we ended up shooting some limits of redheads and canvasbacks on the second weekend of the season here.
It just reiterates how important scouting is and being out and checking your spots.
Yes, that's definitely it.
Well, and what it also reiterates is that you're in a really good waterfowl area. If you're shooting canvasbacks in October, that's awesome. I mean, we don't, we're lucky to get canvasbacks, and if we do, it's we need some hard weather and it's late in the year when they get down this way. So
I've joked about it with everybody I talked to this past week here. We went out, myself and two other guys, and we had our 3-man limit of canvasbacks and redheads. And I said, I have never hunted over diver duck decoys the second weekend of the season, but here it was on the second Sunday, and I didn't bring a single puddle duck decoy with because there wasn't a single puddle duck on my lake.
Mm. You bring up a really good topic that we wanted to cover with you, about decoys specifically and more like mixing decoys. And, you mentioned when you were running your puddle duck pack, your puddle duck, spread, you're mixing the different species and that kind of stuff. But talk a little bit about, how you're deploying those decoys. I mean, are you keeping them in smaller groups by species, when you set them up, or are you just kind of letting them intermingle and is that what you're seeing on the lake, or do they tend to be more segregated and keeping to their own type of species when they're feeding and that sort of thing?
What I like to do when I'm running like the puddle duck decoys early season, I like to bring in mallards and mix in. The first weekend I'm doing a lot of hen mallard decoys. The drakes that you see don't have much color on them. Just simulate as realistic as possible what you're seeing. I'll mix in some pintails for color with them. Some gadwall and widgeon, just depending on, what I usually see. And then from there I bring, I brought, say, 6 or 8 teal decoy this year with. And what I did is, that's really the only thing that I kept in a separate pack. And what I was kind of simulating there is just a flock of teal that had landed right for decoys at that time. And those went right in the hole. Because a lot of my early season birds were teal, mostly blue wing, two green wing already. So that's really the only separation that I do. Is, maybe a flock of teal that landed here. Otherwise, the mallards and the pintails and the widgeon and gadwall are all going together in feeding groups or whatever. They're running the rest of my spread around me.
That's awesome. Let me ask you, if you wouldn't have been out scouting and seen all the diver ducks, how do you think they would have responded to your puddle duck spread?
That's a good question. I sometimes wonder that myself, if I maybe should have brought some mallard duck decoys with. Maybe we would have shot something other than divers. But I probably would have had them work the spread. Had they worked it as well, probably not. I mean, I'm sure they would have gave it a look like some did on Saturday. But I mean, Sunday they were in our face, right in the hole, right where we needed them. And had I just had puddle duck decoys, I don't think we would have had that experience where they were there. And we wouldn't probably have limited out, I would guess.
So you talked about, running those divers on long lines. And, this is something that, I particularly struggle with because I do a lot of hunting out of a canoe and some walking areas and that kind of stuff. So we're tight on space and we kind of maneuver it and make it work the best we can. But how are you rigging up your spreads and transporting them, in and out of the field? Are we talking Texas rigs? You got, individual weighted on with keel grabber types, using slotted bags, mesh bags. Talk a little bit about that portion of your setup and how you're kind of getting in and out of the field, efficiently.
Sure. What I'm doing on my early season, because I'm mixing species depending on what I see the days before and this and that, is I've just got all of my puddle duck decoys are on keel grabber weights. And I've just got them sitting in my shed, and the night before I load the truck up for the next morning, I grab a mesh bag and I throw what decoys I want to put in there. And I stay mobile that way. My late season spreads with my divers and stuff, I've got them in slotted bags. running long lines, or even on some of them I've got individual fuel grabber weights on them. And then those are all in slotted bags. But my early season puddle decoys like that, fuel grabber weights and mesh bags. That way I can change out, if I don't want to take fuel this day, I pull them out and I add more mallards or this or that.
Like to keep them nice and separate. Let me come back to the some of the motion decoys, and I was wondering, do you use any of the butt up decoys or the splasher decoys? And if you do, how important are those to your spread?
I have never used any splashers, butt ups, anything like that. The only motion, like I said, I've ever really worked in would be the jerk lines and mojos. With the butt ups, the only butt ups that I use would be the, like the green headgear or the mallard feeder packs, but, the butt ups, the skinner feeders, the headless feeders, and that's just to show, simulate the feeding birds and stuff. But as far as the butt up and the splashers and stuff, I've never used them.
I think Mojo just came out with a new attachment for some of their rigs that kind of goes down into the water. So when they start spinning, it starts splashing too. It looks, it just another dimension to their decoy there, which is pretty awesome, I thought.
Yeah. I mean, whatever you can do to, if it works for the birds, keep doing it. Whatever you can do to sometimes be different or just simulate what's going on there. And if the birds react well to it, obviously keep doing it.
Casey, I'm sitting here thinking about some of the stuff that you said earlier, and you've talked a lot about mimicking what you're seeing, being as natural as possible, that type of thing. When you look in the Cabela's catalog or these other catalogs that show all the different decoys that the manufacturers have out there, a lot of them are pushing fully flocked decoys as more realistic and more lifelike and that kind of stuff, and as go along with that, more expensive. But how important is, in your opinion, a fully flocked decoy, in this particular application? You're hunting on water, with these decoys for the most part. The sun is glaring off the water, all of that kind of thing. How important is a fully flocked decoy versus, your standard plastic or foam filled decoy that you can buy, a lot more, a lot cheaper, and, can be more efficient with your money there?
For my application in the early seasons, fully flocked decoys on a water spread would be, over the top for me, per se. I wouldn't see a need to get them. I don't see that on water decoys I'm going to get a greater benefit from it. Like you said, you've got the shine coming off the water. You've got this and that going on. The benefit that I see with flocking decoys is when I'm field hunting, especially, earlier on in the season when there's a heavy dew, or if there's a frost overnight, you'll notice that the fully flocked decoys won't get the dew and get the shine as the sun's coming up on them. And that's the greatest benefit that I see to fully flocked over the painted. And that's, typically on my full body geese and stuff. And that's where I like to use them. If I know there's going to be a heavy dew or there's been a heavy dew the past couple mornings, run a fully flocked spread, and I'm not out there as the sun's coming up wiping the dew off the decoys.
Yeah, and we've talked about that difference with the water and field and the benefits there. You spoke about mixing species a little bit in your decoys. Do you use any Canada geese or coots to increase comfort? Obviously, the geese will give more visibility from further away, but anything more of just a comfort level, you've seen, does it work for you?
I've never run coot decoys or anything. I've been fortunate this year. I've had coots swimming through the decoys on most mornings I've been out, which kind of helps there. And you shoot into a flock of ducks, and they usually don't go too far on their back. But I run Canada Goose decoys with mine primarily because where I'm at on the open water is that I'll see, small flocks of geese flying around. And if I've got some goose decoys out, I'm usually able to pull down, usually singles and pairs. But the flock's as big as half a dozen, say 10 geese at times, if I've got some goose decoys out. And that's the greatest reason that I run them.
Some people say that, a Canada goose decoy is the best duck decoy because it just gives you that visibility and that presence. would it be crazy for somebody, do you think, to just throw out, 24 Canada honkers and expect to, be able to shoot some ducks over that? Or do you think that, maybe keeping it smaller and just having that as sort of that accent piece is more appropriate?
That was the topic of my preseason this year. Is I was kind of scrambling to see what I could find, just to try and experiment on opening morning to get as many Canada goose floaters as I could run out in front of my blind and not even bring duck decoys, and just to see if that would increase goose numbers. Obviously, if I could pull on bigger flocks of geese, but also shoot the same amount of ducks. And I was talking with Phil Hudnall, owner of Proven Calls. He was up at Kruger Farms in Starbuck, Minnesota here the Friday before season, and where he hunts in Kentucky, that's what they do, is they run large numbers of Canada goose decoys on the river down there, and they do small numbers of duck decoys. And he said, if you do that, you'll probably shoot as many ducks, if not more ducks, than by running the opposite, and running greater duck numbers and fewer goose numbers. So unfortunately, I wasn't able to scrape up enough goose decoys that I wanted. I ended up running about a dozen and a half. And as luck would have it, Saturday we didn't even see a goose in the sky. But we did end up shooting one bird shy of our 3-man limit of ducks.
I think the first time I ever read an article about that topic, I think was written by Field, actually. So it's funny that you bring him up in in this context. So did you have go ahead? Sorry.
No, go ahead.
Yeah, I was gonna ask, how exactly do you set up the goose and the duck decoys together? Because I've read stuff where geese, if you are hunting geese, they don't like to land over top of ducks. So do you keep those separate, or how? What's your thought process there?
Yeah, that's the biggest thing that I've done. Over as I've hunted more and more, obviously, is just seeing how the birds react to decoys. And one thing that you will have a lot of trouble with is getting geese to land over decoys. So if you're trying to if you've got your goose decoys on the upwind side of your spread, and you're trying to pull geese over your duck decoys, it just doesn't work. The birds just won't work right. They're either going to land closer or farther out into the lake, or land shy of you. They're just not going to work over those decoys. And so what I typically do is I try and run my goose decoys either on the downwind side or run them kind of crosswind for my duck decoys, depending on where the wind is, at, which direction it's coming from, which can be tricky at times, because that sometimes puts my goose decoys on the outside of my spread where they're farther away. But at least with that being said, I know that I'll get the birds to work to the decoys, and I won't have them flare off or not drop down for that final turn. So the biggest thing is just watching where the geese have to work over, and keeping them away from working over your duck decoys.
Good point.
Yeah, I've struggled with that myself. I'm out there, at the blind in the morning, and I'm checking the wind, and I'm trying to figure out, what I'm going to do and where I'm going to put them. And, I don't know why I never really thought to move them out, because, I guess my fear was that they would always just land short and want to swim up. So, I might have to give that a shot next time, because, that's the one thing I haven't tried. And, obviously I could be more successful in that arena for sure. So, definitely a good tip there. But let me ask you something else about decoying ducks just in general. We've all been out there, or at least certainly I have, when you're out there and the birds they're just not decoying. Doesn't seem like they're paying you any mind. They're flying high. There's, other things going on, and it just doesn't seem like they're really giving you much of a look. If you found yourself in that position in the past, what kind of things can you offer for us to employ to try to, what else can we do other than sit there in the blind and, look like idiots as they just fly around and, don't pay us any mind? Is there any kind of tips you can offer us for that situation?
The biggest thing I can say is just mix up, change what you're doing, whether it's changing the spread. If you've got ducks that are coming and they're flaring before they're making their pass, obviously you've got something around the decoys. Get out, take a look at the decoys, change it that way. And there's sometimes days where ducks for birds in general, just don't want to work decoys. There's no need for them to feed or whatever it may be. And it can be very frustrating, but just change what you're doing. If that means adding more motion or adding less motion, it can sometimes be a trial and what am I trying to say here? Can you guys help me out?
Trial and error.
That's good. Trial and error. Okay. So, it can sometimes be a trial and error on what you got to do. Get more aggressive with your calling, cut back on the calling. Sometimes, if you're calling a moderate amount, you just got to cut the calling back to 0 and let the decoys do the work, because they're just not going to react to it. Just change it up. And like I said, it may take a few things before you figure out what makes it tick for them, but just keep trying.
And do you find any ducks that just all the time really don't tend to decoy that well?
That's kind of my love and hate relationship with wood ducks up here. I've had wood ducks do some of the stupidest thing to decoys at times, like I said earlier, bouncing off of the spinning rings in a field. And I've had times where they will not look at a decoy and they will not look at a call. And sometimes my best way with that, like I said, is just to get as simple as you can and be where the birds want to be. I've had times where I've shot wood ducks in a wild rice patch where I go out with no decoys and I just kick my feet and move water, and they come into that. So wood ducks can be the biggest pain in the butt at times, but also some of the most fun to shoot, because they can sometimes work those decoys so well, and the next day they will just not touch it. Mallards can be tricky at times too. On a high or on a full sun day, they start circling and they won't stop circling, and they'll pick any little bit out, whether it be my boat sitting behind my blind or somebody's head peeking out and the sun catching it off of that. Mallards can be tricky on full sun days as well.
Yeah, we've run into the same issue with wood ducks in the past, and gadwall sometimes can be difficult to work for us, in our neck of the woods. But I think the overriding theme of our discussion here today is that there's no one silver bullet that you can just pull out, deploy this technique every time, and you're just going to have a bang up hunt. It's it's not unlike other parts of the season where you just kind of have to pay attention to what's going on around you and kind of be flexible and sort of make the adjustments until you find what works on that particular day. And then when you think you've got it figured out, tomorrow it's going to be completely different. So,
it really comes down to reading the birds. If the birds don't like something, make the adjustment. Don't sit there and think that the next flock might like it. If you've got 2 flocks in a row that aren't doing it, if you've got to sacrifice the next flocks to make the adjustment to make for a couple flocks later, or whatever it might be, just make the adjustment, read the birds. If they don't like it, make them like it.
And in your case, if they don't like it, the next day you can just go shoot canvasbacks, apparently.
There's always that too.
Well, Casey, you've given us a ton of information here and a lot of really great tips. And, it's good to hear that, a lot of the same struggles that we have here on the East Coast, you guys, you deal with, out in Minnesota in your neck of the woods as well. And, I think some of the things that you've mentioned are definitely some tips that I'm going to try out here and see if that can, change our luck a little bit. But is there anything else, any kind of final tips, tactics, things that we haven't touched on yet that you think is beneficial, or you just like to kind of add as far as, how to be successful early season when you're kind of deploying your duck spread?
I'm probably just going to replay the broken record that we've been going over, but do your research and scout. Read the birds, know what they want to do, and be where they want to be. And, it's just, you can never scout too much. Put in your prep work and it'll pay off in the end.
Well said. Couldn't have said it better myself. Dan, anything else that you think is beneficial for our discussion here today?
I think we covered it pretty well. I think so.
I think, Casey addressed all the stuff really, really well, and we're really lucky to have him on the show. So we encourage everyone to check out Casey Hopfer on Facebook if you want to see a bunch of birds getting harvested, and he's a pro staff with Avery Outdoors and Field Proven Calls. So support their efforts and all the stuff that Casey's got going on. So Casey, we appreciate you coming on the show. Thank you for all your insight, and let's do it again soon.
You got it. Thanks for having me. You guys take care. Good luck this season.
All right. Have a safe year.
Thanks. You too.
So there you have it. Casey just brought so much information to the interview there and to the conversation. And, he definitely gave us a couple tips, like a lot of the guys do, that I'll be putting into play the next time that I'm out, hunting ducks. So, What do you think, Dan? What'd you take away from that?
Yeah, one of my biggest things has always been the goose and duck ratio, and talking about putting more goose decoys out while duck hunting. It works for people, and I'm going to try and get a few more floaters out there during this upcoming duck season.
Yeah, and it was funny that he mentioned talking to Field about using geese in that manner, because the first time I had seen that topic addressed was an article, like I'd mentioned, written by Field. So that was really cool that he brought that up. And I'm like you. We've got lots of honkers around here, and I think that is just what they're seeing. That's the natural thing around here. Is there's a lot of honkers and pockets of ducks that are roosting and loafing around in areas with them and feeding and stuff like that. So I think that makes perfect sense. So you get best of both worlds. You get something that's natural and something that's highly visible and gives you a lot of visibility in your spread. So good tips there. Definitely things that I'm going to employ. And we look forward to having Casey back on the show down the road. We think he's just a ton of wealth of knowledge, and really enjoyed having him. So check out Casey on Facebook if you like seeing lots of birds getting taken and nice quality pictures, and support his efforts with Avery Outdoors and Field Proven Calls. So without further ado, let's go ahead and get into this week's parting shot. This week's parting shot is going to be a challenge, if you will, to all of our listeners out there. We see tons of pictures. We talked about it last week on Facebook, piles of birds, lots of success, but we know that it's not like that every single time you go out. We struggle just like everybody else does. And our challenge to you this season is make this the best season possible. Go the extra mile, scout the extra trip, burn the extra gas, boat a little bit further back into the swamp, go the extra mile to make or break that next hunt for you. We think and we know that when you put in that extra effort, and if you've ever done it, you know how rewarding it can be to have a successful hunt because you did the extra step that, the normal guy that just wants to jump out of the truck and shoots ducks isn't going to do. So take pride in that, spend the time out there, on those cold days when you're sitting there and you can't think you can sit any longer, sit another 30 minutes. That's when you're going to get that push of ducks, and that's what's going to really justify it and make it feel good. So take it upon yourself, take the challenge. Make this the best season possible, and don't give up early and hunt it all the way through, and then post up all your kill pictures on our Facebook page so we can share them with everybody too. That's going to do it for this episode of the HP Outdoors Waterfowl Podcast, episode 7. We hope you enjoyed our discussion on 3 and 3.5 inch loads, and our chat with Casey Hopfer talking about early season duck strategies. So feel free to reach out to us, info@hpoutdoors.com, Facebook, Twitter. Reach us on the hotline, 724-609-3695. And any questions or anything you got for us, we'll respond to you, and we'll continue the conversation in that regard. So till next time, for Dan, I'm Josh. Take care.